everyone, Toonworld here. Hopefully you're all doing well today whenever it is you're watching this video. Today I'm going to be showcasing to you my Bystial P.U.N.K deck profile post-Mama. Now, what I want all of you to know is that this particular deck you see here is actually more or less my peer deck profile from a couple of weeks ago with Bystial additions. The reason why is because I still want to play the deck peer, but with the encroaching threat that is tier Ishizu, I needed to sort of spruce up the deck in order to combat that particular deck. So this is now here as my means to counter this upcoming tier 0 format we're going to be in. You shouldn't consider this to be a separate deck profile from peer, as in my opinion at least, I do believe that Bystial P.U.N.K might just be like the main way you play peer P.U.N.K in this current format. Of course, if you want to play a different way you can, but just personally I do feel like this is the best way you can play in this format without getting completely blown out by Ishizu tier, also having a favorable matchup against Sprite. And even though the Bystials don't necessarily do anything against Flunder, your matchup against Flunder isn't that bad with siding and with just the main deck in general, which is already somewhat resilient to what Flunder can put up. Now, there is a lot of other details I want to go over with what had happened last week. Basically, you recall I had mentioned I was going to YCS Pasadena. As you can see, I clearly did well and got first place. But aside from that, I'll put that in the comments below to keep this video to a hopefully below 20 minute minimum, or sorry, a 20 minute minimum, sorry, just so that it doesn't drag on too long. But that said, usual disclaimers per video. Remember that this is my particular take on P.U.N.K, and so it might not be the best way to play P.U.N.K in the current format, and or it might not be tailored best to whatever your preferences are in regards to playing P.U.N.K. So take what I say with a grain of salt. Of course, I'm not the best player in the world, minus of course topping YCS Pasadena. Clearly you can see I did that. Jokes aside though, I'm not the best player in the world, so you don't have to necessarily listen to what I have to say. This out of the way, remember that this deck profile we divided into main sections based on what parts of the deck we'll be covering. We'll have the main deck monsters, the spells and traps, and then the extra deck. I don't think I'll be going over the side deck today because I would like to make some tweaks to that based on my performance at YCS Pasadena. And then we'll round up the video with a conclusion. So at this point, if you haven't liked and subscribed, I would highly recommend you do so. If during the course of the video you find anything you would like to say, comment on or give suggestions on, please feel free to comment down below in the comment section below. Otherwise, I'll get on with the deck profile. So as promised, let's get on with the main deck. And I'm first going to talk about the P.U.N.K names, then I'll talk about the Bystial package and additional hand traps that can sort of be tied into the Bystial package as in terms of like their usage. So in terms of P.U.N.K names though, we're playing 3 copies of Shirakusai, 1 copy of Wagon, or 1 copy of Spider, sorry, 2 copies of Wagon, 3 copies of Xiamen, 3 copies of Deer Note, 3 copies of Foxy Tune, and finally 3 copies of Ogre Dance. If you're a long-term P.U.N.K player, which I assume most of you are since you're watching this channel, you'll notice that these 4 remain at 3. I believe they should be played at 3 for the newer players. Basically just this being able to search your entire deck, this being able to search your entire deck minus level 8s, and this being able to tutor out your entire deck. Deer Note is an extender that helps combo into your level 8 and make bigger bodies and or link up into higher link monsters. But I wouldn't cut it down to 2, mainly because I like being able to open it and summon it off of the field spell. In the worst case scenario, you can access it via the Foxy Tune. For these 3 names, Madam Spider 1, I think this is relatively self-explanatory. Both P.U.N.K traps are great. I'm playing Nashi Warrior Surprise, and so I like keeping this in to search that as a guaranteed disruption through the P.U.N.K engine outside of making, say, Psychic and Punisher, something along those lines. 3 Shirakusai, 2 Wagon. If you recall my previous deck profile, I was only playing 2 Shirakusai, meanwhile 3 Wagon. Excuse me, sorry. The reason why I've switched these ratios up is because in the current format, or basically what I discovered is that this deck can play through D-Shifter. Also, the fusion monster is relatively important to get to. And so this is what Shirakusai enables. Basically, if you can make Rising card with Shirakusai under D-Shifter, you're fine, as in you can still set up a draw, set up your Dragon Drive. And so guaranteeing that you can open it, since D-Shifter shuts these 2 other cards down, means that you can play through D-Shifter and still win those games that otherwise would have been lost if you hadn't opened this, if that makes any sense. It is, of course, also an important part of your end board where you make Amazing Dragon during your opponent's turn. You don't need multiple copies for that, but again, this just goes back to the ideology of just having the chance to open this more often than Wagon. That was my reasoning for Wagon at first, but then I realized that you didn't need to necessarily open Wagon if you could resolve Shirakusai, because you just summon the Wagon off a Rising card and then search the field spell and then. Being able to open Wagon instead, normal summon it, get the field spell, and then make Almirage didn't come up as much as I had anticipated, so I cut it down to 2. You could play 1, I'm playing 2 just because there were a lot of scenarios where I did need the second copy to search cards. Say if I wanted to tutor 1 from deck, I already had 1 in graveyard. If you only play 1, you can't really summon Foxy Tune, or discard Foxy Tune to summon the second Wagon from deck since you wouldn't have 1, whereas in this case you can. So hopefully that makes sense, and of course if you have any questions about these ratios, you can let me know in the comments below. I'm always interested to see what everyone else has in terms of their take on the deck. Now we'll get on with the Bystial package. We are playing 9 Bystial names. It might seem like overkill, but I believe it is necessary. Ooh, excuse me. This is a little messed up here. Sorry, we're playing 3 Serenir, we're playing 3 Druid Swarm, and then we're playing 3 copies of Magnamut. And so regarding the Bystial package, basically just being able to hit the tier names is very important in this format. As long as you open 2, 3, you might be okay. You just need to hit the Merly, Sharon, and the Havness. A lot of people like to hit Rhino, but I do believe that is usually a wrong play to make, just because Rhino itself doesn't do anything. It's the card that it sends to graveyard after it summons itself back that is more important than itself. But regardless, back to the point, essentially, having multiple crows is nice to sort of stop those tier names, because outside of that, then they're forced into weird situations where they need to have these extenders to be able to continue their plays and establish some semblance of a board to stop your plays during your turn. I know I am talking about this as if like this remedies the solution, or that this remedies the current format. It doesn't, so I want you to keep that in mind, that even though you are playing multiple Bystials, this sometimes isn't enough even if you open 1, 2, or 3 copies of different names. It's just my best sort of band-aid to put onto this situation that we're in. And honestly, I do think they're nice. Again, being crows, they can hit multiple decks outside of tier. For example, various rogue decks that play lights or darks, also being able to hit sprite names, and then being able to access level 9 synchro monsters and or rank 6 monsters is very nice as well. You'll see that I am playing some targets for those 2 scenarios in my extra deck. Outside of these Bystial cards, we're also playing 3 Crow, 3 Ash. 3 Crow's the same ideology as the Bystial names, where again we're just trying to get rid of tier names that hit the grave. Crow has the added benefit of being able to bait out Mudora or whatever the other name is that shuffles cards back into the deck. This also has more widespread usage for those situations where maybe you can't hit a light or dark, since of course the Bystial names only specify light or darks. Crow comes in as a patch to that. The Ash Blossom is my choice instead of, say, Skullmeister or Ghost Bell, mainly because it still hits tier in a variety of places. You hit Merly, you can hit Merly if you want, but that's one of the weaker hits. You can hit Sharon, you can hit Rhino, you can hit the field spell. I know, again, as I had said with the Bystial package, that doesn't necessarily remedy your situation all the time. Sometimes your tier opponent can play through those, but regardless, it's a nice inclusion that again hits other rogue decks, other decks in the format, being able to hit the Flunder names, also being able to hit many of the sprite names, albeit sometimes they can still play through it. Regardless, You can sort of see my pessimism right now, sort of leaking through the way I'm describing these things. Basically, it's a very rough format, and for pure Punk, a deck that is good, but not like broken good, it's hard to sort of keep up with these other decks. But I'm trying my best to see what we can do to make our way through this tumultuous format. The last thing I want to say before I move on to the spells and traps, since I'm spending a lot of time on this, I'm not playing Skullmeister or Bell, mainly because these essentially serve those same purposes in terms of like what I'm trying to do, just get rid of the names. And even though Skullmeister and Bell can also hit the tier names, you can sometimes, your opponent can sometimes chain block them, which is where these come into play, where since these directly hit the target, whereas Skullmeister and Bell might not be able to hit it if the opponent makes, say, a Guido Chain Link 2 instead of Chain Link 1. That out of the way, this is the main monsters, or main deck monsters, and we're gonna get on with these spells and traps. Spells and traps. This is very, very straightforward, so I'll go through this very quickly. 3 Telly, 3 Stream Session, 1 trap. That's it. These are, again, self-explanatory. Tutors out any of your level 3 names. This is the whole reason why I believe the deck is still playable, because we get the Pot of Greed basically every turn. And then this is my choice of trap. I know it isn't great against tier most of the time, but it's still pretty solid in that you can still hit some cards that they make during the course of their turn. Also, it is great against Flunder, great against Sprite, so I like keeping it in. You'll notice that I did cut the Cosmic Cyclones. Didn't feel like they were that important in this format since tier boards are mainly just monsters, and I guess it sucks to not be able to hit a Dreaming Town, hit maybe a Smashers, but usually you can still play through those on certain hands, so I wasn't too worried. And then we're not playing Gabu in the main or side. Didn't feel like an Imperm was that great, but yep, 1 minute intro to the spells and traps, and we're gonna get on with the extra deck, which is of more contention to the audience. Now, the extra deck I would like to think is somewhat standard for a Punk build like this. I could be wrong though, since there are some high-rated Punk duelists right now in DB that are playing, say, Power Tool Dragon, the new one, to synchro summon via the Bystials and a Punk name, and then that gives you a negate. I'm playing something else instead. So, to get on with things, we're playing 1 Rising Carp, 1 Wallow, 1 Asa, 1 Dark, 1 Almirage, 1 Unicorn, 1 Axis Code, 1 Underworld Goddess, 2 Dragon Drive, 1 Drake Berserker, 1 Shen Shen, 1 Psychic and Punisher, and finally our favorite, 2 Amazing Dragon. Now, again, I know I keep using this term, but for the most part, some of these are fairly straightforward. For example, the 2 Amazing Dragon, 2 Dragon Drive. 2 Dragon Drive, you do, like, 100% of the time summon 1 copy the first turn, and then you usually need a second copy for the second turn, so 2 is great. 3 might be overkill, which is why I'm not playing 3. 2 Amazing Dragon, the bouncing cards play via Share Kusai, Dragon Drive setup on board is still viable going first, and then the second copy does come up in order to either go for game and or bounce your opponent's cards during your own turn. So I do believe this is still a great 2 of. Psychic and Punisher was considering bumping this up to 2, mainly because it is somewhat hard for tier to out it if they don't play Underworld Goddess, even though, you know, Underworld Goddess is sort of on the come up. But yeah, for now, 1 was okay. Just to slap there as either a way to kill your opponent without them being able to respond, and or to sort of stall out a turn if possible. Rising Carp makes sense as well, main combo piece. Wallow and Shen Shen are the 2 inclusions as a result of Bystial. Wallow is an amazing rank 6, being able to special summon your opponent's monsters and or set their spells and traps. Also being a quick effect, 1 target Medora if you sort of make that relation. But I think it's a great option, since if you open Magnamut during your opponent's turn, you can summon it, grab a Druid Swarm, maybe summon the Druid Swarm during your turn, and then make this. You're basically getting rid of a ton of stuff in the graveyard as a result. So I think it's a great inclusion since we have the space. Shen Shen is also in here for that same reason, where I know it doesn't, again, As I keep saying, not all these choices that I made for this deck solve the tier matchup, but Shen is nice as it does make things a little bit awkward for tier to play through, and they do have to still respect this card, so I like it in here for now. I do want to try out other rank or level 9 synchros, so there's that, but this is in here for now as an option that can of course recur itself as well. Draco Berserker, I admittedly haven't made this at all yet. There is a prominent combo line where if you have, I think, Shirakusai and 2 Punk names in hand, you can make this, but I haven't made it quite yet. I just like it in theory because, again, being able to banish stuff from grave when they activate and or being able to banish hand traps is nice. So until I find a better option, Draco Berserker is here to stay. Dark and Asa. Most of the format has dark targets and graves, so of course you play dark to link climb. Asa's in here as a great way to summon back your opponent's Ishizu names. I do believe like this is a great inclusion right now since we can make it really easily off the bat. Maybe bait out Medora or something, or if not, just link and climb into Unicorn. So that's there. Amirage I might cut. I know that I keep talking about the combo line you make. Let's say a Wagon and then another name in hand, you summon the Wagon and link it off after you search the field spell. Summon the Amirage, banish the Wagon from grave to summon that Punk name from hand. It doesn't come up too often, so this as a result hasn't been played too often in matches, so I might cut it as a result. Unicorn access code, Underworld Goddess, these are just my choice of the bigger link names. Unicorn's great for spinning stuff back, access code is access code talker, and then Underworld Goddess is in here just to out those big towers in the case you can't out them as easily as you would have liked. So this is my extra deck. Remember, we're not doing a side deck today, but I'm always willing to talk about the side deck in the comments below, and then we'll get on with the conclusions. So in regards to concluding remarks, what I want to say is I am honestly very satisfied with this deck list. Minus a few extra deck choices, as I had mentioned, I do feel like this is a pretty strong version of Punk in the current format versus some of the other lists that I have seen, no offense to anyone. Regardless, it does feel weak just because tier itself is so strong. And I want you to know that just because Punk, I do feel like as a deck as a whole, is strong. Just being able to draw 2 cards every turn, that is something other decks don't have as much access to, which gives this deck a competitive advantage as a result. But sometimes, given the way that Punk plays, you can't make a lot of negates. Usually you're reliant on those draws to actually stop your opponent, so that's what makes Punk weak in that regard. Regardless, I do think that you can still squeeze some wins in this format with a build like this, or you can go down a different route if you're just looking to have more fun in the format, and or if you think I'm completely wrong and maybe Bystials aren't the move, whatever it be. But the consensus here is that this is still a very fun deck to play, still a somewhat okay deck to play in the current format. Again, just overshadowed by the fact that the top decks are just so much stronger than this particular deck is. So if you ever feel like you're overwhelmed by the format, always remember you can always take a break. I think the best way to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Is to not play it too much, just to have fun with friends, to go to locals, etc. But still try to compete if you can. But yeah, this is my particular deck profile. Again, I'm very satisfied with it, though I'm always interested to see what all of you viewers have to say, since I always end up missing something. Like last deck profile you saw, I was missing a 40th card, which I didn't catch until a viewer pointed out to me. And then there are some extra deck choices I want to make changes to. Maybe you might have suggestions for the hand trap lineup, and or if I should include a certain engine. Hint hint, go to my hybrid variants deck combo video. But that said, thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. We did hit 1K subscribers recently, so even though I'm not making a celebratory video for that, I do want to know that I do appreciate all of you viewers. It does mean a lot to me that you've been able or willing to support me this far, even when it is clear I sometimes make mistakes. Also, I'm not the best Punk player, versus some of these other Yu-Gi tubers who do go constantly out to events and compete, get tops and such. So we'll definitely be moving forward into the rest of this year and next year with some strong content. So I hope you'll stay subscribed and attentive to what I have to say and what I have to present. Remember to like and subscribe if you haven't, and I will cue the outro here.